The sun was slipping low beyond the hills, pouring its last crimson light across the thatched rooftops of the village. Smoke curled upward from cooking fires, carrying with it the scent of roasted maize and simmering herbs, but underneath that homely aroma there lingered something heavier, an unspoken tension that pressed upon the skin like the weight of storm clouds. The air vibrated faintly with the residue of drums that had been beaten earlier in the evening, their rhythms fading into silence, leaving only the restless chirp of crickets and the soft rustle of dry grass swaying in the dusk. Children who had played all day grew quiet, herded indoors by mothers who pulled them close without explanation. The men who usually sat in groups by the fireside now kept their voices low, exchanging wary glances, as if even their words might be overheard by forces better left unnamed. At the center of this hushed village lived a girl named Amelie. Barely 18, her presence carried a quiet dignity that belied her years. Her skin was smooth and radiant, her eyes deep pools of unspoken thoughts. While other girls her age chattered freely and laughed in the open, Amelie carried herself differently, always alert, always listening, her silence not born of timidity but of resilience. She knew how to endure, how to bend without breaking. Every chore she performed, whether grinding grain or carrying water from the river, bore the stamp of her patience, as though she had learned that the world demanded more from her than it ever gave. Yet behind that patience was a life scarred by small, daily cruelties. Her father's gaze was cold and unyielding, a wall against which her yearning for affection had long since been dashed. His words, when they came, were commands or rebukes, never the soft murmur of love. Her stepmother, sharper still, carried her bitterness openly. She mocked Amelie for her quietness, for the grace with which she walked, for the gentleness that seemed to infuriate her. She would toss Amelie scraps to eat, laugh when the girl stumbled, and mutter curses that she thought Amelie did not hear. Each insult, each petty act of malice, was endured in silence, for Amelie had learned that resistance only sharpened their cruelty. She bore her suffering the way the dry earth bore the heat, without complaint, waiting for the rains that might one day come. But the rains were not what the villagers whispered of that season. Their talk, hushed though it was, circled around a darker thirst. The witch doctor, a figure both feared and revered, had been seen wandering more often near the forest edge. His staff, adorned with bones and feathers, clattered with each step, and his eyes glowed with something otherworldly when the firelight caught them. It was said he had grown hungry, not for food, not for wealth, but for blood and power. Whispers curled through the village like smoke. He sought a sacrifice, a life pure enough to please the restless spirits he claimed to command. Mothers drew their children close when he passed, fathers lowered their gaze, yet no one spoke openly against him. To do so was to invite curses that clung like thorns to one's very soul. Amelie had heard these whispers too. She did not ask questions. Her life had already taught her that knowledge was often a burden too heavy to carry, but in the stillness of night, lying on her mat with only the faint glow of embers beside her, she felt a shiver that was not from the cold. Something unseen moved beneath the ordinary life of the village. The silences stretched too long, the glances lingered too heavy, the air seemed charged with waiting. She could not name it, but she felt it as surely as one feels the pressure of a storm before the sky breaks. The dusk deepened, shadows lengthening across the red earth. A wind stirred, carrying dust that danced briefly in the dying light before settling again. Amelie stood at the threshold of her father's hut, her bare feet coated in that dust, her eyes turned toward the horizon. She did not yet know what path was being laid before her, nor the price her own blood had already been bartered for. She only knew that the silence of the village tonight was different, heavier, watchful. And though no one else dared to speak it aloud, she felt in her bones the truth that hovered like a whisper at the edge of hearing. In the dust, even the spirits were listening. The father sat alone that evening, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor that never seemed to yield enough. His name was Mbeki, and though the villagers regarded him as a man of strength, inside him festered a bitterness as constant as the dry wind that swept across the plains. Poverty had gnawed at his life like a relentless animal, stripping him of pride, leaving him grasping for scraps of dignity. Each season brought promises of abundance, yet his crops withered, his herds dwindled, and his house remained one of the poorest in the village. He told himself it was fate, but in his darker hours he felt cursed. And when his eyes fell on Amelie, his daughter with her quiet beauty, her spirit that seemed to shine brighter than anything in his own life, his bitterness deepened into resentment. She reminded him of her dead mother, the wife he had once loved but who had left him too soon, leaving only this girl as a reminder of what he had lost. To Mbeki, Amelie was not a blessing but a burden, a mouth to feed, a mirror of his failures and perhaps worst of all, a silent witness to his descent into weakness. It was this resentment, mingled with desperation, that led him into the forest one night, long after the village fires had burned low. He carried with him a calabash of palm wine, his only offering, and a courage that came less from conviction than from despair. The path was narrow and choked with shadows, and every rustle in the undergrowth set his heart pounding. Yet he pressed on until he reached the place where few dared to linger, the clearing where the witch doctor's hut stood. The hut itself seemed alive, breathing with the spirits that clung to its walls. Skulls of animals hung from the eaves, hollow eyes staring outward into the night. Bundles of herbs and feathers dangled like warnings, their silhouettes swaying gently in the wind. A faint glow flickered inside, casting shapes that twisted and writhed as though the shadows themselves obeyed the will of the man within. The witch doctor emerged before Mbeki could speak. His frame was draped in blood-red cloth, streaked with black markings that looked like veins of fire. Around his neck hung a necklace of bones, each piece carved with symbols that seemed to writhe when the light touched them. His eyes, bright and penetrating, seemed to strip Mbeki bare, seeing not only the man but every hunger, every fear that lived within him. He smiled, though it was not the smile of a friend but of a man who already knew why another had come. "You have walked far, Mbeki," he said, his voice a low murmur that carried like a chant. "Men do not come here unless they are ready to pay what must be paid." Mbeki swallowed, his throat dry. "I seek relief, protection, wealth. I am tired of struggling while others prosper." His words tumbled out, each one sounding smaller in the open air than they had in his mind. The witch doctor nodded slowly as though he had heard such pleas 1,000 times. He turned and beckoned Mbeki inside. The air within was thick with incense and smoke, so heavy that it clung to the lungs. Objects lined the shelves, animal bones etched with runes, jars filled with strange powders, skins stretched tight across frames, each marked with dark stains. In the center, a low altar was draped in crimson cloth, and on it lay a dagger whose blade gleamed with unnatural light. "You ask for wealth," the witch doctor said, his fingers trailing across the altar as though stroking a living thing. "Cattle enough to fill your kraal, land that will yield harvests without end. You ask for protection that no sickness nor curse touch your home. These things can be given. But nothing comes without price." His gaze sharpened, pinning Mbeki where he sat. The spirits hunger. They ask for one thing. A life, pure, unspoiled, without stain. A daughter. The words hung in the air like a spear. Mbeki's heart lurched, and for a moment his vision blurred. He thought of Amelie, her quiet figure bent over the grinding stone, her gentle hands lifting water from the well. He thought of her eyes, so much like her mother's, carrying that patient sorrow. Something twisted in him, something almost like guilt, but it was fleeting. The bitterness surged back, heavier than before. What had she given him but another mouth to feed, another reminder of his poverty? What future could she bring him, other than the same suffering he already bore? "What will I gain?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "Cattle," the witch doctor replied. "Herds that multiply as though the earth itself bears them for you. Fields that will not fail. Protection stronger than any man's spear. You will be envied, Mbeki. You will be feared." He leaned closer, his breath reeking of herbs and smoke. "All in exchange for the girl. One night, one offering. The spirits will drink and you will rise." The hut seemed to close in on him, the red cloth pulsing like a heart. Mbeki felt the ground tilt beneath him, but he gritted his teeth. He thought of years of hunger, of the whispers of villagers who pitied him, of the laughter of children when his goats stumbled weak and dying. The flicker of pity for his daughter was snuffed out beneath the weight of his longing for power. His jaw set, his eyes hardened. "I will give her," he said, the words falling like stones into silence. The witch doctor smiled, a grin that showed too many teeth. He poured palm wine into 2 cups carved from horn and offered one to Mbeki. Together they drank, the bitter liquid burning down his throat. Then the witch doctor pricked Mbeki's thumb with the dagger, smearing the blood across the crimson cloth. The symbols upon it seemed to writhe and glow as though awakened. "It is done," the witch doctor murmured. "The spirits have heard. Soon they will feast. And you, Mbeki, will be remade." Mbeki lowered the cup, his stomach twisted with both dread and triumph. He did not look back as he left the hut, the night pressing heavy around him. Somewhere deep within, a voice whispered of the choice he had made, but he silenced it, pressing forward into the darkness. The bargain had been sealed and there was no turning back. The first light of dawn crept across the village, painting the thatched roofs with pale gold. Roosters crowed, their calls echoing into the stillness of the morning, while smoke from early fires rose in thin, uncertain streams. Amelie stirred from her mat, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Her stepmother's voice, sharp and impatient as always, urged her to fetch water, to sweep the floor, to move her body before the day grew hot. Yet before she could rise, her father appeared at the doorway. His face was unreadable, his tone clipped and heavy. "Come with me," he said. "There is work to be done." Amelie blinked at him, surprised. Her father rarely summoned her directly, it was always through the commands of her stepmother. Still she obeyed. She pulled her faded cloth around her shoulders and followed him into the cool air. The sun was not yet strong, the earth still damp with dew. There was something strange in the way he walked, quick, determined, as though carrying a weight too heavy for words. She wanted to ask where they were going, but the tightness in his jaw silenced her. The path they took was not toward the river or the fields. Instead, it wound toward the forest that loomed beyond the last huts of the village. Amelie's steps slowed, unease creeping up her spine. The forest was a place of caution, a place spoken of in whispers. It was where children were warned not to wander, where hunters told tales of spirits that watched from the shadows. Yet her father did not falter, his strides carrying him deeper beneath the canopy of trees. The air grew cooler there, the morning sounds of the village fading until only the crunch of their footsteps remained. Amelie followed, her heart beating faster with each step. The silence between them was heavy, suffocating. She watched her father's back, broad and rigid, and for the first time she saw not strength but a distance that frightened her. He would not turn, would not look at her. His silence was a wall she could not climb. The deeper they went, the darker the path grew, branches closing overhead to steal away the light. The air thickened with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. Amelie's unease blossomed into fear, though she forced herself to walk steadily, her bare feet pressing into the soil. She whispered a prayer beneath her breath, a plea to the ancestors to guide her, though she did not yet know why her heart cried out so fiercely. Then, as the path curved sharply around a cluster of ancient trees, they reached a clearing. The sight before her froze her blood. The witch doctor was waiting, his red cloth draped about his shoulders, his staff planted firmly in the ground. Around him, bones dangled from strings, rattling softly in the morning breeze. His eyes gleamed when he saw them, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Amelie turned to her father in confusion. Her lips parted to ask what this meant, why the witch doctor stood there as though expecting them. But her father's gaze slid past her. He did not answer. He walked forward, every step deliberate, until he stood before the witch doctor. And then it happened. Without a word, he pushed her forward, his hand firm on her arm. Amelie stumbled, caught off guard, her body trembling as she tried to understand. She looked up at her father, searching his face for reassurance, for any sign that this was not what it seemed. But his eyes refused to meet hers. They stayed fixed on the ground, on the witch doctor, on anything but the daughter who had trusted him. "No," she whispered, her voice small and breaking. "Baba, please?" The witch doctor's laughter cut through her plea. It was a sound thick and mocking, rising like smoke into the morning air. He stepped forward, his shadow falling across her, his teeth flashing as though he tasted her fear. Amelie's confusion shattered into horror. Her knees weakened, her breath caught in her chest. She realized then, her father had brought her here not for work, not for safety, but as an offering. He had led her into the hands of the very man the villagers whispered about in fear. The truth struck her like a blow, and she staggered under its weight. The witch doctor's laughter swelled, echoing off the trees, bouncing back until it seemed as though the whole forest mocked her. Birds burst from the branches, startled into flight, yet even their wings could not scatter the sound. Amelie's heart pounded as her world tilted, the ground beneath her no longer steady. She turned once more to her father, her eyes brimming with tears, but he stood rigid, silent, unyielding. His betrayal hung between them like a blade. And so, in the cold light of dawn, the girl who had borne cruelty in silence now bore the heaviest cruelty of all, the betrayal of blood, delivered without mercy, sealed by silence, and marked forever by the witch doctor's laughter. The witch doctor's grip on Amelie's arm was like iron as he dragged her across the clearing and toward the hut that loomed at its center. From a distance, the structure had seemed merely strange. Up close, it was something monstrous. Its walls were built not just of mud and reeds but of bones pressed into the clay, long white bones that jutted like the ribs of some great beast. Skulls, bleached and hollow-eyed, were mounted on shelves carved into the outer wall, their grins fixed in a silence that felt like mockery. Animal hides were stretched across the roof, patched together in uneven swaths, and the wind rattled through them with a sound that was almost like breath. The doorway gaped open, black and waiting, and a wave of thick, pungent smoke rolled outward, choking Amelie as she stumbled inside. The air was suffocating. Herbs smoldered in clay bowls, their acrid fumes mingling with the stench of dried blood and rotting meat. Shadows writhed against the walls, cast by a fire that burned low and sullen in the center of the room. Everywhere she looked there were objects of horror, bundles of feathers stained dark, jars filled with things she could not name, charms tied together with twine and hair. Bones dangled from the ceiling, clinking softly when they moved, as though whispering to one another. The floor was coated in a layer of ash that clung to her feet and sent up small gray clouds with every step. The witch doctor thrust her toward the ground, his voice low and commanding. "Sit," he said, and when she hesitated, his hand struck her cheek with such force that stars burst across her vision. She fell into the ashes, the dust rising around her like a shroud. He laughed then, a cruel hollow sound, and turned back to his altar. She coughed, tears springing to her eyes, but she did not rise. Her body trembled as the ash coated her skin, clinging to her clothes, seeping into her mouth until she tasted only bitterness. From a wooden bowl he scooped out scraps of food, gristly meat, crusts hardened to stone, and tossed them at her feet as one might feed a dog. "Eat," he commanded. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but pride clenched her throat. She picked at the pieces with shaking fingers, forcing herself to chew, each mouthful laced with humiliation. His laughter echoed again, filling the hut with its malice. Days bled into nights, though Amelie could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Smoke choked her lungs, the fire burned endlessly, and the witch doctor's presence was a shadow she could not escape. He marked her skin with chalk, strange symbols drawn across her arms, her face, her chest. He muttered chants as he did so, his voice guttural, calling to things unseen. Sometimes, when his words grew faster, the air seemed to stir, the bones hanging from the rafters rattling in answer. Amelie felt the weight of eyes upon her, though no one else was in the room. When she closed her own eyes, she swore she heard whispers curling just beyond hearing, voices that spoke not in words but in sensations: hunger, sorrow, rage. They slipped into her dreams too, filling her sleep with visions of fire and shadow. He tormented her not only with threats of death but with reminders of her abandonment. "Even your father cast you away," he hissed one night as he scattered more ashes over her bowed head. "What hope do you have, girl? No one comes for you. No one cares for you. You are mine now, body and soul." His words burrowed deep, and though Amelie tried to resist them, her heart ached with the truth they carried. Alone, betrayed, bound in a place where even light seemed afraid to linger, her spirit wavered. And yet she endured. In the quiet hours, when the witch doctor left her in the shadows, she whispered prayers into the smoke. She spoke to her mother's spirit, to the ancestors whose names she remembered, to the God who had fashioned the earth. Her voice was weak, but it was steady. "Do not let me be forgotten," she prayed. "See me here. Hold me here. Give me strength to wait." Her tears fell into the ash, darkening it into streaks of gray, but she lifted her face and breathed the smoke as though it were incense at a shrine. If her body was broken, she would not let her soul be surrendered. Strange things began to stir around her, things even the witch doctor did not seem to control. At first, it was only the fire, flickering wildly when he chanted, flaring high when he raised his dagger, dimming suddenly when Amelie whispered her prayers. He frowned at these changes but said nothing, muttering louder to drown them out. Then the bones that hung from the rafters began to rattle on their own, not with the rhythm of the wind but with a pulse that seemed alive. At night, when the witch doctor slept, Amelie heard footsteps circling the hut though no one was there, the sound of bare feet brushing against earth and ash. Animals too behaved oddly. A crow perched outside the hut for 3 nights in a row, its eyes fixed on her through the doorway, its cawing low and mournful. A snake slithered in one evening and coiled itself by her feet, not striking, not threatening, only resting as if guarding her. Even the dogs in the village barked and whined when they drew near, refusing to cross the threshold. The witch doctor grew irritable, snapping at the spirits he claimed to command, accusing them of rebellion. He scrawled fresh symbols across the floor, spat into the fire, sprinkled powders that hissed when they touched the flames. Yet nothing stilled the unease. Amelie saw these signs and felt a stirring deep within herself, a small, fragile flame that would not be smothered. The spirits were near. They were watching. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had not abandoned her after all. Her prayers were reaching ears greater than the witch doctor's, her tears watering roots buried deep in the unseen. Each flicker of light, each whisper in the smoke, each animal that lingered where it should not, these became her hope, her proof that she was not alone in this darkness. And though fear pressed in like the smoke that filled her lungs, Amelie straightened her spine where she sat in the ashes. She would endure. She would wait. For even here, bound and broken, something greater was moving in the shadows, something the witch doctor could not silence. The day of the ritual dawned heavy with heat, the air thick as though even the sky waited in dread. Word had spread quietly through the village, carried in whispers that dared not be spoken too loud. The witch doctor was preparing something great, a ceremony unlike any before. By mid-afternoon, the villagers gathered at the edge of the clearing, drawn by fear and curiosity alike. They came in silence, their eyes wide, their steps hesitant as though compelled against their will. Drums began to thunder, slow at first, then faster, their rhythm like a heartbeat gone mad. The ground vibrated beneath Amelie's feet as she was dragged from the hut, her body bound in ropes that chafed her wrists, her skin painted with chalk symbols that burned like fire wherever they touched. She stumbled forward, ash still clinging to her hair and clothes, her face streaked with the remnants of her tears. The witch doctor's attendants pushed her toward the altar, a slab of stone blackened by years of offerings, its surface stained a dark, permanent red. She was forced to stand upon it, the heat of the stone searing her bare feet, while the crowd shifted uneasily around her. Some could not meet her eyes, others stared in horrified fascination. A few muttered prayers under their breath, torn between fear of the spirits and pity for the girl they believed doomed. The witch doctor towered beside the altar, his body swathed in blood-red cloth, his face painted with lines of white that made him look less man than specter. Around his neck, bones rattled with each movement, and in his hands he held a dagger whose blade gleamed hungrily in the sunlight. He raised his arms high, and the drums pounded louder, their rhythm echoing through the forest, calling on forces unseen. His voice rose above the noise, guttural and commanding, a chant in a tongue older than the village itself. Each syllable seemed to thicken the air, pressing down upon the people, filling their chests with dread. Amelie's heart pounded, her breath ragged as she searched the faces in the crowd for her father. And there he was, standing at the edge, his arms folded, his eyes fixed firmly on the ground. He would not look at her. He stood among his people, but apart from them, a man who had chosen silence over blood. Her heart twisted, not in hope but in the final sting of betrayal. Whatever happened now, she was alone. The chant deepened, became a growl that seemed to shake the leaves on the trees. Smoke rose from the altar, curling into shapes that looked like grasping hands, like faces screaming without sound. The villagers gasped, some stepping back, but none dared leave. Amelie felt the rope dig deeper into her skin as the witch doctor circled her, his voice building, summoning. Shadows lengthened though the sun still burned above, and the fire pits lit around the clearing flared high, flames snapping as though whipped by an unseen wind. The dagger gleamed brighter as he lifted it, his chant reaching its peak. Amelie closed her eyes, her body trembling, whispering her final prayer into the roar of drums and voices. "Do not forget me. Do not let my blood fall unseen." Then, just as the blade was poised to strike, the world shifted. A sudden wind tore through the clearing, howling with a voice that was not of earth. The flames that had leapt so high bent backward, then dimmed to embers, smoke curling upward in frantic spirals. The drums faltered as the drummers' hands froze, their eyes wide with terror. The very trees seemed to groan, their branches swaying though no storm cloud shadowed the sky. The witch doctor staggered, his chant breaking. His eyes darted about as though seeking the source, but the source was everywhere. The air shimmered, heavy with a presence older than his craft. From the smoke and the shadows, shapes began to emerge, faces formed of light and fire, bodies made of mist and ash. The ancestors had come, rising like a tide that no man could command. Their voices were not heard with ears but felt in the marrow of the bones, deep and resonant, each syllable striking like thunder. "This life is not yours to take," the spirits intoned, their words a chorus that echoed through earth and sky. "She is not condemned. She is chosen." Amelie opened her eyes, and the world seemed ablaze with their light. The ropes that bound her loosened as though cut by unseen hands, falling slack around her wrists. The markings on her skin flared brightly, then dissolved into golden dust that drifted away on the wind. The villagers fell to their knees, bowing their heads, their mouths open in awe and terror. Even those who had pitied her now dared not look upon her, for she stood no longer merely as a girl but as one marked by the divine. The witch doctor roared in defiance, clutching his dagger tighter. "She is mine," he bellowed, his voice trembling with rage and fear. I called you here. I command you. He thrust the blade toward the spirits, but it quivered in his hand, shaking as though resisting him. The altar beneath Amelie cracked with a sound like splitting stone, red dust rising from its surface. The spirits' light flared brighter, their forms solidifying, towering over the witch doctor. You cannot command what you do not honor, they thundered. You cannot bind what we have freed. The ground beneath him trembled, sending him stumbling backward. His chants grew frantic, desperate, but the words tumbled over themselves, powerless against the storm he had unleashed. Amelie stood still upon the altar, her eyes wide but no longer only with fear. There was something new within her gaze now, something fierce, something lit from within. She could feel the spirit's presence around her, within her, their strength flowing into her bones. She was not their victim. She was their vessel. The villagers murmured, some weeping, some clutching their heads as if unable to bear the weight of what they witnessed. The drums lay silent, the fires smoldered, and all eyes turned to the girl who had been led to slaughter but instead was lifted into light. The witch doctor, once feared, now seemed small. His power faltered before their eyes, his voice drowned out by the voices of the ancestors. He fought to resist, to hold on to the sacrifice he had claimed, but the spirits would not allow it. They had spoken. They had chosen. And no mortal man, no matter his craft, could stand against their decree. The clearing quaked as the spirits surged into form. They were not bound by flesh but by something greater, light and shadow woven together, fire flickering into faces that were at once familiar and terrifying. Their eyes burned like coals, their mouths opened not in sound but in waves of power that rippled through every tree, every stone, every heart that dared to beat nearby. The villagers who had gathered to watch fell prostrate, pressing their foreheads into the soil, unable to bear the brilliance of what had risen before them. Amelie felt herself lifted from the altar, her feet leaving the stone, the ropes slipping away like shed snakeskin. Her body glowed with a strange radiance, faint yet unearthly, as though the ancestors had clothed her in their strength. The pain of her bruises dulled, her breath steadied, and for the first time since her betrayal she felt not fear but certainty. She was no longer the powerless daughter of a greedy father, no longer the captive of a witch doctor's cruelty. She was chosen, shielded by voices older than the soil beneath her feet. The witch doctor's hands trembled as he raised his dagger once more, but the weapon betrayed him. Its blade turned black, smoke rising from its edge as though eaten by invisible fire. With a crack it split in two, the shards falling uselessly into the dirt. The charms that had dangled from his body, bones, feathers, beads soaked in blood, smoldered and burned, their power unraveling in sparks that hissed against his skin. He clawed at them desperately, muttering broken chants, but his voice cracked, faltered, became no more than a hoarse whisper drowned out by the thunder of the spirits. One by one the tokens of his craft betrayed him. The skulls at his altar shattered, their hollow eyes spilling dust. The painted marks across his chest faded as if licked away by unseen flames. The drums that had once obeyed his command now lay mute, their skins torn by invisible claws. Even the air around him seemed to recoil, drawing back from his presence as though ashamed to carry his breath. The spirits' voices rose, a chorus that made the earth shake and the trees sway. You tried to buy her soul, they thundered, but her blood is not yours. You sought to bind the will of the ancestors, yet forgot the first law. No man commands what he does not serve. Amelie hovered above the altar, her eyes wide as the voices filled her bones. She could feel them, 1,000 whispers of the dead who had walked before her, their wisdom pressed into her heart. She wept silently, not out of fear but out of awe, for she knew she stood in the presence of those who had shaped her people, those who carried their stories in eternity. The witch doctor screamed, defiance tearing from his throat, but it was the cry of a man already defeated. He stumbled backward, his legs buckling as the ground beneath him groaned. The earth split in a jagged line, dust and stones scattering. He clawed at the air as if to hold himself upright, but the soil betrayed him as surely as the spirits had. His charms burst into flame, his skin blistering as he tried in vain to douse the fires with his hands. No, he shouted, his voice raw. She was promised. She was mine. The spirit's reply shook the marrow of every living soul that heard it. You own nothing that was not given. You take what is not yours, and so the earth shall take you. The crack beneath him widened, a dark mouth opening in the soil. His scream tore through the clearing as he fell to his knees, trying to claw his way free, but the ground swallowed his hands, his arms, dragging him inch by inch into its depths. The villagers gasped, some daring to look up in horror as the once feared man was reduced to nothing but a pleading figure, his body sinking as though the earth itself thirsted for his punishment. The smell of burning bone filled the air. His voice rose in a final wail, high and broken, before it cut off suddenly. Dust burst upward in a cloud, and when it cleared, there was no trace of him, only a hollow in the ground, smoldering with the faint glow of fire beneath. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, as though the world itself had stopped breathing. Amelie was lowered gently to the earth, her feet touching the soil once more. The villagers lifted their heads cautiously, their eyes wide as they looked upon her. Some wept openly, others bowed low, trembling as they whispered prayers of thanks and fear. For they knew that the girl who had been betrayed, the girl they had pitied, was no longer simply a daughter of the village. She was marked by the ancestors, shielded by their fire. The spirits' forms began to dissolve, their brilliance fading into the wind, but their voices lingered, softer now, like a song sung beneath the earth. Walk in our shadow, child. Carry our fire. The one who was to be sacrificed shall instead be the vessel of our will. The flames of the fire pits reignited, but now they burned steady, calm, their light golden instead of red. The villagers, still trembling, began to chant softly, not the witch doctor's chant, but a prayer of their own, words of reverence for the ancestors who had shown their power. The forest grew still, as though listening, the night alive with a silence so profound it seemed holy. Amelie stood at the heart of it all, her tears drying on her cheeks, her breath steady. She looked at the hollow where the witch doctor had vanished and then at the faces of her people. The betrayal of her father burned still in her heart, but above it now was something greater, the knowledge that she was no longer abandoned. The spirits had chosen her, and the world would never again look at her as it once had. The father returned to the village with a swagger in his step and greed swelling in his chest. He had counted the wealth promised him 1,000 times in his mind, cattle filling the fields, grain rising tall in the granaries, his name whispered with envy instead of scorn. Yet when he crossed the threshold of his homestead, he found only silence waiting. No cattle lowed. No children laughed. Even the air seemed parched, as though the sky itself had turned its face away. Still he boasted. To those who asked where Amelie had gone, he waved a careless hand. She is gone to serve a greater purpose, he said with a smirk, his voice thick with false pride. The witch doctor has taken her under his care. The spirits themselves will reward me. Soon, you will see cattle grazing my fields, and your mouths will water when I slaughter goats for the feast. His wife, the stepmother, cackled beside him, her tongue sharp as ever. Yes, Amelie was a burden. Now she will finally bring honor to this house. But the first night after his return, the cries began. A calf, born healthy that morning, lay dead by dusk, its eyes glazed white. The father cursed the wolves, though none had entered the village. On the second night, the riverbank where he fetched water cracked with dryness though rain had fallen only days before. By the third night, the wind carried whispers that clung to the ears of those who passed his hut. Curses, mutterings, the rustle of voices too many to count. His neighbors drew away, their faces uneasy, their greetings clipped. The cattle rot, a woman murmured to her companion, shaking her head. The earth dries under his step. Misfortune follows him like a shadow. It is the girl, another whispered, eyes darting. He gave her away, and the ancestors do not forgive such bargains. The father ignored them, puffing his chest as though their words were no more than buzzing flies. Yet at night he tossed in his mat, his dreams filled with ash and blood. He woke to find his lips cracked, his tongue dry as bark no matter how much water he drank. The gourds emptied quickly and still his thirst burned hotter. On the seventh night, as the moon hung like a pale skull over the huts, the ground stirred at the edge of the village. A wind rose though no storm followed it, carrying with it a sound that made the elders stiffen, the deep, rumbling call of the ancestors. The villagers gathered, fear knotting their stomachs as the dust at the center of the homestead began to swirl. And from the dust stepped Amelie. She was not as she had been. Her clothes were torn, her body marked with faint streaks of chalk and ash, yet her face glowed with an otherworldly calm. Her eyes carried the weight of voices beyond the grave. The children gasped and clutched their mothers, but none dared to run. For in her presence there was no malice, only judgment. The father staggered forward, his face blanching. Amelie, he rasped, forcing a laugh. My child. You see, the spirits kept you safe. You must tell them I gave you willingly, that it was for our good. His hands fluttered like broken wings as he reached for her. Amelie did not flinch. Her voice, when it came, was not hers alone. It was layered with the tones of many, deep, ancient, echoing through every ear. You sold your own blood for riches that were never yours. You broke the law of the ancestors, turning your face from their will. And now, the spirits have summoned me to witness what becomes of a man who betrays his own. The villagers shifted uneasily, whispering. The stepmother shrank back, her laughter shriveled on her lips. The father's smile broke, fear etching deep lines across his face. I only wanted better, he stammered. I was promised wealth, cattle, protection. It was not betrayal, it was survival. The earth answered him before Amelie could. A tremor rippled under his feet. The water gourds at his hut cracked open, spilling liquid that turned to mud before their eyes. He lunged forward, scooping the brown sludge with both hands, shoving it to his lips. He drank greedily, choking, yet when he pulled back, his throat was as dry as before. His tongue lolled in his mouth, swollen with thirst. Laughter broke out among the villagers, not mocking but horrified, the kind of laughter that masks fear. They watched as he scrambled on his knees to the puddle of mud, sucking at it like a starving dog, only to cough and gag, unsatisfied. His lips grew stained, his face smeared with filth, and still he drank, and still his thirst consumed him. Amelie's voice cut through the night. Your curse is this: every day you will drink from the mud, but you will never quench your thirst. The ancestors deny you the sweetness of water. You will live in hunger of the one thing no man can live without. And as you drink, the people will remember what greed has made of you. The villagers murmured in awe, some nodding, others shuddering. None doubted what they saw. His wealth had withered, his honor crumbled, his body reduced to a pitiful spectacle. The man who once strutted with pride now crawled in filth, his hands black with mud, his eyes burning with despair. The stepmother tried to slink away, but the women of the village caught her arm, their faces grim. You mocked the girl, one said. You laughed as she was taken. You will stay and you will watch him suffer. The father's voice cracked into a wail. Amelie, my daughter, forgive me. Give me water, just one sip, please. He clawed at the ground toward her, his teeth chattering, his face streaked with wet earth. But Amelie only shook her head. The glow around her dimmed slightly, her shoulders heavy with sorrow. I prayed once for your love. You gave me ashes instead. Now the spirits have spoken, and I cannot undo what they have decreed. The crowd bowed low as she turned, her figure swallowed by the swirling dust that had carried her in. When the wind stilled, she was gone, leaving only silence and the sound of the father's desperate slurping as he pressed his mouth to the mud. From that night forward, no stream in the village would quench him, no rain would satisfy his lips. Every day he bent low to the filth, drinking, never full, never at peace. And the children grew up watching, whispering, that is what becomes of a man who sells his own blood. Amelie did not emerge from the ordeal as the broken girl her father and the witch doctor had intended. She walked from the shadows of the forest with her spine straight, her steps steady, and her breath carrying the rhythm of voices older than the earth itself. Though her skin still bore the chalk marks and the ashes of her captivity, those very stains shimmered faintly in the sunlight, as though the spirits had pressed their hands upon her flesh and left a blessing behind. Where others saw dirt and ruin, now they saw gold hidden in gray, a radiance born not of wealth but of endurance and grace. The children were the first to notice. They peeked from behind the huts, their small fingers curling against the clay walls, their eyes wide with curiosity. She glows, one whispered, pointing at the way Amelie's skin caught the sun. She walks like the ancestors themselves walk. Word spread quickly, faster than fire on dry grass, and soon women came forward, their faces full of awe, their hands lifted in quiet reverence. The men, though slower, bowed their heads as she passed, for there was something in her gaze that unsettled them, a truth too sharp to deny, a power that did not need weapons to command respect. Amelie did not return to the village as a victim seeking pity, nor as a wanderer without a home. She returned spirit-marked, the dust of the ancestors still clinging to her hair, the echo of their judgment still alive in her voice. And when she spoke, people listened. Her words carried a weight they could not explain. It was as though the earth itself hummed beneath her syllables, the trees pausing to hear, the wind bending its course. The women were the first to gather around her, for they had seen suffering themselves, the blows of husbands, the hunger of their children, the mocking laughter of men who believed themselves stronger. They looked to Amelie and saw not only survival but triumph, and in her they glimpsed their own worth. Teach us, one woman said, her baby clinging to her hip. Teach us how to endure without breaking. Amelie touched the child's head gently, her fingers warm and steady. It is not endurance alone, she replied softly, her voice carrying like a song. It is remembering that the ancestors walk with us, even when we are forced into the dust. The children, sensing no fear in her, followed her everywhere. They carried pebbles and sticks as offerings, placed at her feet as though she were a living shrine. They tugged at her skirt, asking her to tell stories of the spirits who had lifted her from the altar, of the fire-shadowed figures whose voices had shaken the earth. Amelie smiled at them, her eyes soft with a gentleness the witch doctor could never have crushed. She told them stories not of fear but of strength hidden in weakness, of the way a reed bends with the wind yet never breaks, of how even dust can shine when the sun touches it. The men, though some had mocked her in the past, now lowered their eyes when she passed. They remembered how she had been forced to eat from the floor, mocked by her father and stepmother, and yet had risen higher than either of them. Some whispered that she carried the ancestors in her shadow, others said her steps left marks of light in the soil. None dared to cross her, but she sought no revenge against them. Instead, she walked among them with quiet dignity, her silence a mirror in which they saw their own shame. Forgiveness flowed from her lips, though it was not cheaply given. To the women who once laughed at her rags she said, "You did not know what fire burned in me and now you see it. Let us walk together." To the children who had pointed fingers and called her names, she smiled and placed her hand upon their heads, blessing them with words of renewal. To the elders who had turned away when she was dragged into the forest she said, "The ancestors saw your silence, but they have given me life again. Use your voices now to protect the weak, so that silence does not damn you a second time." But when her father crawled before her, his lips cracked, his beard caked with mud, his eyes wild with the thirst that gnawed at his soul, Amelie's face did not soften. He begged her, his voice hoarse. "Amelie, my daughter, forgive me. Lift this curse, let the water flow sweet in my mouth again. I am your blood, your father." His words fell like stones at her feet, heavy but hollow. Amelie stood above him, her eyes shining not with cruelty but with a grief deeper than any blade could cut. "You are my father by blood," she said, her voice layered with the spirit's resonance, "but not by love. The ancestors offered you a daughter to guide and protect, and you traded her for promises of wealth. My forgiveness cannot wash away the curse they have placed upon you, for it was not mine to give. Drink your fill of mud, and may you remember with every swallow the love you cast aside." The villagers watched, their hearts trembling between pity and awe. They saw a girl who had once been shamed now stand untouchable, a woman marked by spirits, her body glowing faintly in the dusk. They whispered her name with reverence, not fear. Some said she was no longer entirely human but something more, a bridge between the living and the ancestors. And so Amelie's days took on a new rhythm. At dawn, she walked among the fields, her presence enough to stir growth from the earth that had lain barren under her father's curse. At midday she gathered the women and children, teaching them songs of strength and stories of resilience. At night she sat by the fire, her voice weaving through the air like smoke, telling of the spirit's justice, of how no bargain made in blood can escape the eyes of those who came before. She ruled not as a queen crowned with gold or seated upon a throne, but as a leader whose crown was suffering turned into wisdom, whose throne was the respect etched into every bowed head. No feast celebrated her, yet every heart carried her name with reverence. Her stepmother cowered in silence, her laughter long gone, living each day as a shadow of the woman she once was, forced to watch the daughter she scorned rise higher than she could ever dream. Amelie forgave much, for forgiveness was the proof of her strength. But she did not forgive her father, for some wounds are not meant to be soothed, some betrayals not meant to be erased. His curse was his alone, and her freedom was hers, earned not by his hands but by the will of the spirits who had seen her worth when no one else had. Thus Amelie, once sold like chattel, became the spirit-marked guide of her people. Where once she was silenced, now her voice rang clear, a reminder that suffering can be transformed, that ashes can shine like gold, and that those who are cast into dust may rise brighter than the sun itself. The morning after Amelie's return to the village felt unlike any other. Where once there had been the heavy stillness of misfortune, with cattle stumbling to their deaths, the earth cracking dry and children coughing from thirst, there was now a stirring, a new breath in the air. The fields seemed to awaken first, green shoots breaking through soil that had refused life for so long. Rain fell in measured drops, not as a storm, but as a gentle blessing that sank deep into the ground. Women stepped barefoot into the fields, touching the new crops as if afraid they might vanish, and found the stalks cool, firm, and alive. The curse that had hung over the land was gone, replaced with a quiet rhythm of peace. At the center of it all was Amelie. She did not sit on a throne or wear a crown, yet her presence was felt in every corner of the village. People woke at dawn with the knowledge that she walked among them, watching with the same eyes that had seen the fire shadows of the ancestors. Her leadership was not declared with trumpets, but whispered in the way villagers sought her counsel, the way women brought her offerings of maize and milk, the way children clung to her skirts, refusing to leave her side. Peace was not forced, it settled like dew, light and certain, under her guidance. The river that had once run dark and muddied cleared, its waters flowing smooth and bright. Children laughed as they splashed in it again, their bodies glistening in the sunlight, their cries echoing across the valley. Cattle, once weak and staggering, now grew strong, their hides shining, their horns stretching proudly toward the sky. Even the air felt different, lighter, scented with the fragrance of flowers that had long disappeared. Each dawn became a promise, each night a rest without fear. The people, seeing all of this, felt the weight of gratitude press upon their hearts. They whispered Amelie's name not as one whispers the name of a woman, but as one whispers the name of a blessing. Soon they gathered to build her a shrine. It was not grand, nor made of gold or stone, but of clay and wood, woven with branches and adorned with offerings of beads, gourds and fresh flowers. At its heart stood a carved figure of a young woman with arms lifted toward the sky, her face both sorrowful and serene. They named her shrine Tamba Yamoya, the daughter of the spirits. Each day people came to the shrine with gifts. Some brought the first fruits of their harvest, others jars of milk, others yet only their prayers whispered softly into the still air. Mothers brought their daughters, asking Amelie to bless them with strength. Fathers brought their sons, asking that they learn wisdom and humility. Even elders bowed before her image, murmuring words of reverence. They knew their survival was not the result of chance, but of Amelie's suffering and the Spirit's mercy. Yet even in this season of peace, the memory of betrayal lingered like a shadow at the edge of light. The people did not forget the father who had sold his own blood, nor the witch doctor who had tried to claim power with cruelty. Their names became warnings spoken to children. Do not trade love for greed, lest you drink mud forever. Do not raise your hand against the innocent, lest the ancestors tear the bones from your flesh. These stories remained alive, etched into the rhythm of daily life, a reminder that peace is a gift that must be guarded. But alongside those memories was another, the memory of redemption. Amelie's story was no longer only one of betrayal and suffering. It was also a story of rising, of forgiveness where forgiveness was possible, and of justice where justice was necessary. People spoke of her as proof that the ancestors did not abandon their children, even in the darkest hour. They taught that through her suffering the village itself had been reborn. Amelie, for her part, never sought worship. She did not linger at her shrine, nor claim the gifts as her own. Instead, she urged the people to honor the spirits first, to remember that the power flowing through her was not hers to keep, but theirs to share. I was chosen to remind you, she told them, that the earth does not forget us, and the ancestors do not sleep. Her humility deepened their respect, for she carried greatness lightly, like a garment she could put aside at will. And so the days passed into seasons, the seasons into years, and Amelie's name remained bright on the lips of her people. She had endured betrayal that should have destroyed her, yet she had risen to become the quiet strength of her village. The shrine stood, not as a monument to sorrow, but as a beacon of hope. In every prayer whispered there, in every harvest gathered, in every laugh of a child playing by the clear river, the people remembered. Suffering had given way to blessing, and the dawn that broke over the village was no ordinary morning, but a new beginning carried on Amelie's spirit. The pond shimmered in the late afternoon sun, its surface broken only by the laughter of children who splashed and played along its edges. Their bare feet sent ripples chasing one another across the water, and when they bent over to peer into the depths, their faces returned to them, not in the dull gray reflections of ordinary water, but in ripples touched with a faint golden light. It was as though the pond itself remembered, holding within its depths the echo of a blessing that time could not wash away. An elder sat beneath a wide acacia tree nearby, his staff planted firmly in the earth as he watched the children play. His eyes were heavy with years, but when he looked at the pond, a knowing smile tugged at his lips. Slowly he called the children to him, his voice gentle but commanding. They gathered in a half-circle at his feet, still dripping with water, their curious faces lifted toward him. The elder leaned forward, his words low and deliberate, like a drumbeat meant to be carried by memory. "This pond is not only water," he told them. "It is a mirror of what came before. Long ago, a girl named Amelie lived among us. She was young like you, her heart pure, her spirit strong. But her own father, blinded by greed, sold her to the witch doctor, thinking wealth was greater than blood. The children gasped, eyes widening, for betrayal by one's own blood was a horror they could barely imagine. The elder's gaze swept across them, his voice steady. The witch doctor thought he could take her life for his power. But the spirit saw. They rose in their fire and shadow, and they marked Amelie not for death, but for eternity. Her father lost everything, cursed to drink mud for the rest of his days. The witch doctor was swallowed by the very earth he called upon. And Amelie returned to us, no longer a victim, but as the one chosen by the spirits. He pointed his staff toward the pond, where the golden ripples shimmered again as though responding to his words. This is why the water here runs clear. This is why the crops grow and why our cattle thrive. The spirits gave us this peace through her suffering. But never forget what nearly destroyed us. Blood must never be betrayed, for betrayal does not escape the eyes of the ancestors. The earth listens. The wind carries truth. The water reflects what we are. The children looked into the pond again, and for a fleeting moment, some swore they saw another face among their reflections. The calm, luminous image of a young woman watching over them. They did not feel fear. Instead, they felt warmth, as though the blessing of Amelie's spirit was still with them. The elder rose slowly, leaning on his staff, and gave them the final words to carry into their lives. The father sold her to death, but the spirits bought her for eternity.